to hop on here with us. There she is. All right, Dr. Arnoff, I think we will go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a meeting of the East Greenwich School Committee. I will go ahead and introduce the folks we have here with us tonight. Of course, I'm Carolyn Mark. I'm chair of the school committee. I have Lori McEwen, our vice chair. We have Allison Powell, Dr. Jean Quinn, Ann Musella, Matt Plain, Jeff Dronzik, Superintendent Meyer, Counselor Oliverio, and of course, thank you to Dr. Arnoff for being our host this evening, and to Mrs. DeMiglio for her assistance. Just a reminder to everybody that we will be taking roll call votes, and so if we have anybody in attendance who is on a cell phone or a landline, that they'll be able to know who is voting and how they are voting. So with that, I would like to invite everyone to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First agenda item is the sealing of executive session minutes. We don't have any this evening, so we will move right on to public comment. Just a reminder to members of the public, we are trying very much to run these Zoom meetings very much like we hold our in-person meetings. This public comment portion of the agenda is for members of the public who have a comment, a question, or concern regarding any item that is not on the agenda. If you have a question, comment, or concern regarding an agenda item, I would ask that you hold that until we get to that agenda item. And you can indicate that you would like to make a public comment on an agenda item by using the raise hand function on your screen. And again, if we have anybody who is attending via phone, you can raise your hand by simply pressing *9. But I would ask you to please wait until we get to the actual agenda item so that I know that you have a public comment regarding that particular agenda item. So having said that, I would look to our participant list to see if we have anybody raising their hand to make a public comment this evening. And Dr. Arnoff, help me to be sure that I don't miss anyone. I'm not seeing any raised hands.
There are no raised hands, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll go ahead and move ahead. The next item on our agenda is approval of minutes. We have regular and executive session minutes from July 14th. I believe all members of the school committee were present for both of those meetings, so I would entertain a motion to approve both sets of minutes.
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Plain.
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Quinn. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, roll call vote, please.
Allison Powell,
Aye.
Ann Musella,
Aye.
Carolyn Mark,
Aye.
Jean Quinn,
Aye.
Jeff Dronzik,
Aye.
Lori McEwen,
Aye.
Matt Plain.
Aye.
The ayes have it. The minutes are adopted. Thank you. That brings us to our action items this evening. You have 4 homeschool requests in front of you, actually 5. Technically, you have the materials. I would entertain a motion to approve all of the homeschool requests that are before us this evening.
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Plain, seconded by Dr. McEwen. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, roll call vote, please.
Allison Powell.
Aye.
Ann Musella,
Aye.
Carolyn Mark,
Aye.
Jean Quinn,
Aye.
Jeff Dronzek,
Aye.
Lori McEwen,
Aye.
Matt Plain.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Thank you. Next, we have two resignations before us this evening. The first is Robin Kasparian, a paraprofessional at Frenchtown, and the second is Jody Mangiarotti, a mock trial coach for Cole. I'll entertain a motion to accept those resignations.
So moved.
So moved by Dr. McEwen,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Plain. Discussion? I would just, of course, like to thank both of them for their years of service and wish them all the best in whatever they move on to next. And I know that Mrs. Mangiarotti will be moving on to the high school, which is her reason for moving away from the position of mock trial coach at Cole. Both of my kids have had an opportunity to study under her tutelage, and so grateful for all that she's done and looking forward to seeing where she puts her energies next. Does anybody have any other discussion? All those in favor, roll call vote.
Allison Powell,
Aye.
Ann Musella,
Aye.
Carolyn Mark,
Aye.
Jean Quinn,
Aye.
Jeff Dronzek,
Aye.
Lori McEwen,
Aye.
Matt Plain.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Thank you. Next, we have a retirement. Colleen Osmansky, who's been a teacher at Hannaford for many years. I'll entertain a motion to accept her retirement.
So moved.
So moved by Dr. Quinn,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Powell. Is there any discussion? I would say the very same about Mrs. Osmansky. I'm so grateful for all of her years of service and wish her nothing but the best in the future. And I hope that we will have an opportunity to properly recognize all of our additional retirements and resignations at some point soon.
Absolutely.
Any other discussion? All those in favor, roll call vote.
Allison Powell,
Aye.
Ann Musella,
Aye.
Carolyn Mark,
Aye.
Jean Quinn,
Aye.
Jeff Dronzek,
Aye.
Lori McEwen,
Aye.
Matt Plain.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Thank you. Next, you have in front of you a resolution, a proposed resolution on education as a constitutional right. This is on our agenda at the request of Tim Duffy, who is the executive director of the Rhode Island Association of School Committees. Many of you will recall that back in 2018, we adopted a very similar resolution. This was before, I believe, some of our new members were on the committee, but it's not a resolution that is new to us. There is a slight change in it. Strategically, the shift has been away from making the amendments with respect to Article 7 and putting the suggested amendments into Article 1. I will read this into the record and then we can discuss it and the committee can choose to act on it tonight, or we can decide to consider it again at our next meeting. I didn't necessarily put it on as a first read because it is a resolution that this committee has adopted previously. But as there's a little bit of a change to it, I'll go ahead and read it into the record. Whereas Article 1, entitled Declaration of Certain Constitutional Rights and Principles, was first adopted in 1843, and whereas in 1993, the Massachusetts Supreme Court found that the Commonwealth had a constitutional duty to ensure the education of its children in the public schools. Shortly thereafter, the Massachusetts legislature passed and then Governor Weld signed into law the Education Reform Act. Massachusetts also provided an additional $2 billion in school aid over several years. The Reform Act ushered in an era of accountability, and the increase in funding significantly narrowed the achievement gap. And whereas in 1995, the Rhode Island Supreme Court held in a lawsuit brought by the Pawtucket and Woonsocket school districts that the Education Clause did not intend to guarantee an equal, adequate, and meaningful education because both at the time Article 12 was adopted and for decades afterward, there was no requirement that public education be provided at all in this state. And whereas in 2014, the Rhode Island Supreme Court reaffirmed their 1995 ruling in a suit again brought by the Pawtucket and Woonsocket school districts, but stated that we emphasize that we are deeply concerned by the conditions of the schools in Pawtucket and Woonsocket. And whereas we believe education should be a fundamental right for all Rhode Island residents. And whereas Representative Mary Messier and Senator Harold Metz have introduced House Bill 7575 and Senate Bill 2711, respective House and Senate resolutions that would amend Article 1 by adding Section 24, right to an adequate education, in quotes. Public education is a fundamental right of all Rhode Island residents. It shall therefore be the paramount duty of the General Assembly, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and other government agencies and officials who are charged with educational responsibilities to provide all Rhode Island residents with equal opportunities to receive an education that is adequate and meaningful to permit them to achieve at high levels and to become lifelong learners, productive workers, and responsible citizens. And whereas amending Article 1 would make education the paramount duty of the General Assembly and recognize that public education is a fundamental right. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the East Greenwich School Committee respectfully requests the Rhode Island General Assembly to pass House Bill 7575 and Senate Bill 2711 and cause a referendum amending Article 1 to place before voters at the November 3, 2020 general election. And be it further resolved that a copy of this resolution will be forwarded to every Rhode Island municipality, school committee, state senator, state representative, and the governor. So that's the proposed resolution before you. I would open it up for discussion. I would also entertain a motion to approve. We can always have a discussion about it once there's a motion on the table.
I'll make a motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve by Dr. McEwen, seconded by Ms. Musella. Discussion? Mr. Plain.
Thank you. In the second paragraph in 1993, it should be the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court.
Thank you. Duly noted. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor? Oh, Ms. Powell, go ahead.
I think I'm like on a little delay. So I just was wondering about the timing of the resolution because I know you said it's been before, and that they're supporting legislation that's being introduced. Is there a thought that the legislation's actually going to possibly come out of committee, or does this have anything to do with what's going on right now? I was just curious about the timing.
Yeah, no, this has been a multi-year effort on the part of the Rhode Island Association of School Committees. They've simply asked that school committees, if they've adopted the resolution in the past, that they refresh it. That we do have an opportunity to get it on the ballot, even sitting here in July, because the General Assembly has not concluded its business. And so I think the hope this year, as it's been with every year leading up to this, the hope has been that it will actually make it onto the ballot. So there's nothing unique to the timing of it. It's been a multi-year effort.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. And actually, I would like to suggest that we expand the distribution list just to include our local elected officials, our town council. I know that there are town councils and city councils around the state that are also adopting this resolution. So I certainly would want to be sure that our colleagues on the town side see it as well. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor, roll call vote.
Allison Powell.
Aye.
Ann Musella.
Aye.
Carolyn Mark.
Aye.
Jean Quinn.
Aye.
Jeff Dronzek.
Aye.
Lori McEwen.
Aye.
Matt Plain.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Thank you, everyone. So that brings us to, we have one policy on as a second read and up for possible adoption, and this is policy 4141, identification and isolation of individuals infected with COVID-19. This is a new policy that has already had a first read. Ms. Musella, do you want to provide any context, any changes to this policy since the last time this body
Yes.
considered it?
All of the above. Thank you. Again, this is a policy that was essentially drafted by our nursing staff in consultation with our supervising pediatrician that has gone through policy committee, obviously, just to flesh out into policy. There are a couple of additional changes that I would like to bring forward based on feedback from our nursing staff that are not in the markup that you've seen. First, it's just recommended to change the title to COVID-19 Health and Safety Protocols and Procedures is one change. The other change that is marked since the first read that you already have in front of you is in the last paragraph before the section that begins before diagnosis. That includes the link for emotional support for families and for employees. In addition, you'll note too that this policy is full of hyperlinks just to make sure that the policy itself can link to the most current information given the ongoing nature of the virus and all that entails. The only other change proposed by the nursing staff would be at page 2. You see the heading, when students and/or staff exhibit symptoms during the school or workday. Here, just because the symptoms are delineated, unlike as opposed to being linked to, the recommendation is that the sentence begins upon the discovery of any COVID symptoms, including but not limited to the following. And those are the only changes from the first read. Oh, the other thing I'd like to point out is there's a reference to it's at the last page, the continued teaching and learning. And then there's bracketed language C, distance learning policy. That distance learning policy is up for a first read today. So the presumption is that there will be one. So I guess I would recommend just striking that bracketed language. But if this body approves this policy, with the understanding that we could just include the distance learning policy in and add it as a reference below, which is not a substantive change to the policy, just an additional reference. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So you are recommending it for approval this evening then?
Yes.
Well, I will entertain a motion to approve this new policy regarding health and safety protocols and procedures.
So moved.
So moved by Ms. Powell.
Second.
Second by Dr. McEwen. Discussion. Mr. Plain.
First, thank you for all your hard work on this and all the other policies. And I really like the hyperlink. I'm wondering if in all instances it incorporates by reference what you intend to incorporate by reference by hyperlinking it without another citation to something. So if you printed this out and it was in a policy book, and I'm looking at, I don't know what page 1, where it says students or employees who have any listed symptoms, that looks like a hyperlink, at least on mine. So if you were intending to incorporate whatever's at that hyperlink by reference, I'm not sure we don't need additional language to ensure we do that. I don't know, but I really like the hyperlink.
And we can do it. It's an excellent point. What we may want to do is just include in the list of references, perhaps just name the references with websites, or what do you think, Mr. Oliverio?
I like the references. I'm not a big fan of the hyperlink.
Yeah.
Because you can, a lot of the laws change from time to time, and if there's an amendment to a law and you hyperlink, it may not be what you originally intended. So I like just the reference at the end.
So in other words,
but it's really it's up to you, because when you hyperlink it, I think you are incorporating it by reference.
That's a good point. What we want to do is incorporate by reference the most up-to-date information, which is ongoing in nature. So what I'm hearing what I'm hearing our council suggest is maybe just include as the references sort of the websites where they're found, and the actual, not a hyperlink, but the URL perhaps, and the description of the website, just in a list of references at the end. Is that
And-
acceptable?
And that's typically what we do. So I kind of that's just my preference, but the committee can do whatever it pleases in that regard. I just think it flows a little better. It might cause some confusion.
So keep the body of the policy as is, just flesh out the list of references at the end, which is sort of a ministerial task. I mean, the nurses, I would ask actually Ms. DiMeglio to work with, the nursing staff on that.
Yeah,
because
pass.
they're the ones, right? No,
Yeah.
okay,
Pass with just, yeah.
right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other discussion? So all those in favor of approving the new policy signify by saying aye via roll call vote.
Allison Powell,
Aye.
Ann Musella,
Aye.
Carolyn Mark,
Aye.
Jean Quinn,
Aye.
Jeff Dronzak,
Aye.
Lori McEwen,
Aye.
Matt Plain.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That brings us to reports of the superintendent. So I will turn it over to Mrs. Meyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, members of the school committee and panelists and attendees that are here with us this evening. I'll update you on the principal and assistant principal search for East Greenwich High School. We concluded the second round of interviews for East Greenwich High School principal just at about 5:30 this evening, 6 o'clock. The process involved 8 candidates originally with 2 interview rounds. The first round, Mr. Pedraza had led the search process and the arranging of the interviews and organizing all of that. 8 candidates were interviewed. In the first round, we had interview committee members that included school committee. Ms. Powell and Mr. Quinn were from the school committee. We had 2 students. We had a representative from SEAC, parents, and teachers in the first round. During that round, as I said, they interviewed 8 candidates and sent 5 forward to the second round. The second round interview committee that, as I said, concluded at about 6 o'clock this evening, had 13 folks on the interview committee. Ms. Musella was from the school committee. We had teachers, 2 parents, a former member, a graduate, a parent of a graduate, that she was a member of SEAC, previously a member of SEAC. We had good discussion. There is a clear candidate that came forward through the process. So I will be pursuing that as superintendent of schools and hope to move forward in securing somebody to assume that position. Assistant principal, the posting was put in this week, and as of when I looked last, I think we had about 6 candidates. So we anticipate moving forward with that as well. Our intention was to secure the principal first, so that person could be part of the process of selecting the assistant principal. And I'm happy to answer any questions if any of you have that before I move on to the reopening planning piece.
Does anybody have any questions on that first part? All right, thank you very much. Very exciting.
It is exciting. It is exciting. Okay, so reopening planning. Well, I would say about 3 minutes before I logged into the meeting this evening, and that's why I was a minute late, we got feedback back from RIDE. And I was only able to skim it, but I can tell you that we had commendations really in the teaching and learning area, especially with special education. They really highlighted that and the depth of the work that was in that. They also highlighted, our approach to learning loss and how we intend to support our students that way. They highlighted our consistent high expectations for distance learning and our overall planning in teaching and learning. So that's something to really celebrate. We have some places that we had to respond to things. One was, which really had escaped me. I don't know, Allison, if you got to see that, but we didn't plan for lunch in a distance learning scenario like we had done, which we did in the spring. So we need to go back and fill that piece in. So that was my first quick overview, but it is clear, and the feedback is in there, that we must provide plans for all 4 scenarios. So, you know, while we recommended a partial or a limited, to use the proper terminology, for our elementary students, right? 50% of those students attending, we have to submit plans where all elementary kids K-5 attend. Now, I say that very carefully about plans, because we do not, based on what I know and understand, determine how we're going to open schools and under what scenario. That determination will come from, I guess, the governor's office in collaboration with the Rhode Island Department of Health. Based on conditions at the time with the virus, they will say how you will open your schools. Now, our recommendation, and that long discussion we had in the forum the other night, is based on the existing square footage that we have in our buildings and the amount of students in our classes. So this is something for us to just be mindful of. You know, we do not have across the board ability to have the necessary square footage in our elementary classrooms to provide certainly 6 feet. In some cases, we're not sure we can even do the 3 feet. And that was the basis for our recommendation that we were advocating for and encouraging Rhode Island Department of Ed to consider these options for elementary schools that are in this situation. There are, you know, East Greenwich has high enrollment. We know that, and our enrollment continues to increase. Not every district has the same conditions with which they are operating. In speaking with some other districts, they generally have, you know, 17 children in a class, so that is very easy to create the appropriate space. But we will go back. I mean, our plan did include that. I guess we just have to unhighlight the advocacy piece. Maybe we can rephrase the terminology in there. And we have to revisit that Monday. We have to, for the elementary level, they must attend all 5 days, or we must have a plan for all 5 days. So we will revisit that. My understanding is we won't know, no district will know until August 17th is when it is anticipated a decision will be made, which leaves you such a short window. So having said all of that, you know, we do anticipate and are planning for the opportunity to opt into a distance learning scenario. We are working very hard on trying to figure out how that will work, but we intend to send a survey out in the near future. 3 surveys are going to go out in the very near future, and we're trying to be intentional about not pushing too much information out. One will be a survey that will come out tomorrow morning related to one of the forums. Our first forum will be with Dr. Silversmith and our school nurse teachers around health and safety. The intention there was to, you know, gather questions ahead of time so Dr. Silversmith and the school nurse teachers can respond to those. So I just, for everybody that's visiting here this evening, it's just a heads up that that survey is going to come out asking for any questions you may have. Subsequent to that, a survey will come out asking if families want to opt in to a distance learning program. And then along with that comes a transportation survey that will be asking very specifically for people to just opt into transportation, knowing we are limited with the amount of seats that we have, and have to be incredibly mindful of that and plan for that. So I know, you know, from my personal perspective, it's incredibly hard to work through all of these things where questions just keep multiplying, and nobody has, me in particular, in trying to respond to families' emails and staff emails, that I can't give a clear answer on many questions. And that is challenging for us all, because that's not where we like to be. We like to be able to respond to that. So for all the families that are trying to, and the staff that are trying to plan for what our opening will look like, we don't have a clear answer yet. We don't. You know, we will be told by RIDE or the Rhode Island Department of Health what scenario you must open under. For the high school, I will say that, you know, the partial model that they put forth, and they had okayed that for the middle and the high school, that it is allowable to have kids attend like an AB type of setting of 50% of the time. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions. I think I got everything down.
I'll open it up to questions, and also Ms. Powell, as the co-chair of the reopening task force, if you have anything you'd like to add.
No, I actually had a question because we didn't have a chance to talk about this. I knew we were planning on sending out a survey for opting in. It was not my understanding that this particular one would be a binding decision at this time. It was more to gather information, but we should probably be clear about that, especially since we haven't published details about what distance learning is going to look like for families.
And that's a fair and good point. We're going to have some, I mean, binding is a very official term, but, you know, we need, in order to plan appropriately, you know, we would need to have some assurances that this is what people are intending to do, so that we can create the settings that will provide an instructor to that student and how that will work. We don't, you know, we're still working on the details of how that might play out. And I don't have a clear answer for you right now, because there's some specifics that have to be worked out.
I'm just trying to anticipate.
I know.
Questions about that, and that was the biggest one that I could think of when it comes to that, because we had talked about, you know, once we do choose it, we will have to commit to like a certain amount of time that families will commit to distance learning. So just making sure whenever we do send something out, we're clear about what we're asking of families.
Yeah. No, good point.
Ms. Misella?
Just
And
a
then Mr. Johnson.
just a transportation related comment, but I could easily make it in the transportation subcommittee report. But the August 17th deadline is, I mean, it's difficult because we're trying to, I don't know, put some parameters around a moving target, which is pretty much impossible. So it's challenging for so many reasons. But one of the things we're going to have to consider, and I'll talk about this more in transportation, is if there's an August 7th, if we won't know until August 17th what we're supposed to do, that means we won't necessarily know what transportation is supposed to look like, which could delay, if not necessarily the first school day, the start of school, but it could potentially delay the start of transportation services. Just because if we have a limited scenario in terms of who's actually going to be physically in school, how much of that time do we really want our kids to spend on in the middle of bus confusion? So it's just something else. It's just another piece of the puzzle.
Thank you. Mr. Dronzek?
Yes. I was just curious, is there much direction in the feedback, or is it just very, very high level? And my understanding is there's probably not a lot, but I'm just curious.
It's 2 boxes of information, that's it.
All right.
You might want to think about that. That's how it's phrased.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I just wanted to make sure, see if it was the same every place or any different. So so there's not really any feedback as to whether they would allow the setup you suggested. It just tells you whether you covered it or not, correct?
It says that you must prepare for a scenario. that includes K-5 and 5 days a week.
Right, but preparing for and implementing are two different things.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other comments or questions from members of the committee at this time? Mr. Plain.
Thanks for both the report and all your hard work on the planning. On the in-person, full in-person, or at least for K-5, even though we didn't include that in our proposed plans for July 17th, I'm guessing that that had at least been in the works, so that it's not like the team has to go back and, okay.
No, it actually was in the works. We just put the intentional language in there that said, we recommend that RIDE consider it to be allowable. But I think the only feedback about that was they said we didn't provide assurances that, so we just have to rephrase that language. But
And the places where they said we didn't provide assurances, there are tables where we had to put X's. And when it was like converted to PDF, the X's got kind of moved to the side. So I guess they thought we didn't check the box. And the totality of the feedback there was like, you should put a check mark in this box. Thank you and have a nice day. That was it. It wasn't substantive at all. We're providing assurances. So we had it all. It's all there.
Does anybody have any other comments or questions at this time? More to come the next time we gather. Thank you. So at this time, I'm very pleased to report that after several months of having to deal with a whole lot of things, we have now officially put teaching and learning back on the agenda as an agenda item, and I hope that we can continue to do so moving forward. We wanted to take this opportunity to have Dr. Hughes provide everybody with an update on our extended school year program, since it is currently underway. So Dr. Arnoff, if you could please promote Dr. Hughes as a panelist. Welcome, Dr. Hughes. Thanks for being with us. You need to unmute.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the school committee, Superintendent Meyer, Assistant Superintendent Pedraza, and community members. It's nice to see all of you. Dr. Arnoff has a bit of a presentation for you to discuss our extended school year program, which is in fact underway and almost completed for the summer. We will wrap up on August 7th. Next slide, please. I would be remiss in not expressing gratitude, not only to the whole school community, but the school committee, as well as our East Greenwich SEAC, our parents, our special educators, related service providers, building principals, everyone who has worked so hard in getting our differently abled learners and as a priority in our teaching and learning plan for reopening schools, as well as the work this summer in leading up to that. So I was very pleased to hear Superintendent Meyer discuss that. We did get some feedback on that. So certainly expressing gratitude this evening. Next slide. So in reflection, in planning and moving forward from our extended school year, as you know, we did hold several task force meetings with our parents, and the decision to move into virtual extended school year was not taken lightly. And so being at the point now, we can do some reflection and thinking about what we've learned from distance learning in the spring, as well as the virtual extended school year that we have at this point. And we've really looked specifically and sought feedback and received it on the social emotional needs of students, our most vulnerable learners. The type of communication that families were most comfortable receiving, and different feedback related to that. For as many families that we have many different needs and many different wants, and many different ways of doing things. So we certainly take all of that into consideration whenever we are making plans. Thinking about our most vulnerable learners and the level of engagement and interaction, what lessons we could have learned and did learn from the spring, moving into the summer and moving forward. Virtual services and what those look like, and the amazing things that are occurring right now, which I'll share. The sustainability of how to provide services for students who are supported with IEPs and how best to do that given the circumstances. And then how do we measure progress for our students pre-COVID, during school closure, during extended school year if applicable, and then moving into the reopening of the schoolhouse. Next slide, please. So again, in planning for our extended school year and thinking about distance learning and then shifting into the reopening of the schoolhouse and the kinds of things that we needed to really focus in on really became very individualized. And so Student Services had sent out a survey to all of the families on the listserv, as well as our SEAC sent out a survey to families. So there was a lot of data that was collected. Not just that, but our individualized, distance learning plans that special educators and related service providers put together and had been updating as the learning was occurring. The effectiveness of the program, the comprehensiveness of what we could and couldn't accomplish, delivery, just the connection and interaction. It became very clear in school closure that the connection and interaction and the social emotional needs of our students and our families and our teachers and service providers really became paramount in finding ways to help that and those struggles. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And also thinking about measuring, as I said earlier, progress and potential regression. I will tell you a little bit about that in a bit, about how we're planning on addressing that as we come back. Again, that recoupment piece. And then as we shift into thinking about students coming back into classrooms, thinking about our most vulnerable students, but everyone in terms of health and safety and emotional health and safety. An all-in approach for our students who are serviced with IEPs, really looking specifically at baseline data as we collect that, developing a plan for intervention, and that individualized piece. We certainly learned a lot, as I said, and again, measurement, and I like to say review, revise, repeat, which is typically what we do in special education anyway, but certainly in these times. Next slide, please. So the link for our plan for special education services is embedded in the teaching and learning section of the reopening plan, as you know, and it does hit upon these three particular areas. And so one of them, of course, was in thinking about revisiting students' individualized education plans in partnership with teachers and our school community. How would we do that? And so, of course, we have a plan for that. In the template, you will see a planning sheet that we will be working through when we come back to school with each of our teams, with our parents, and our individualized IEP teams to really capture the data, as I said, from before COVID, during what happened when we had school closure, ESY if applicable, and moving on. And then coming up with a plan that we can agree on that would help mitigate any COVID-19 gap in learning. And so really specific interventions for our students. And then really thinking about how we're going to be approaching services for our students. This has been an area of need as well in terms of thinking about that through our extended school year program. And as teachers have become more accustomed to teaching online, there have been some amazing things that have occurred, lots of new learning, fresh approaches that I'm just so proud of our educators and paraprofessionals who are working so diligently this summer. And so in thinking about that, when we do shift to coming back into the building, how does that look? And so there are lots of questions around that from our parents as well as our teachers and related service providers and how best to accommodate that. And as well is we needed to address, how we're going to be looking at our services, any services that potentially were missed or not accounted for. How do we build, again, that relationship with families to have that conversation? And so we do have another planning document within the plan, and also a plan for a specific and comprehensive individualized distance learning plan, which, of course, when this all started, no one really knew what was going to occur, and we went with a basic plan and we moved on from that and evolved. So lots of things in the works for that. And of course, my dog is going to start barking right now, but next slide, please. And so, like I was saying, this was a picture from one of the many preschool lessons that get sent to me. And in this picture, you will see 3 of our service providers doing a co-treatment with students. And there are just some amazing things occurring. I was in a high school lesson as well, and there were digital books going on, and the engagement was there, and it was very nice to see paraprofessionals as well interacting with students, and they're really doing a nice job planning together with the special educators as well. So we have approximately 70 students across pre-K through 12 in our extended school year program. That is historically a consistent number. And families sometimes don't send students on certain days, etc. So it's a rough number of on any given extended school year day. Our service time, we have 11 special educators. You can see the staff that we have in place working, our speech pathologists, occupational therapists, school psychologists, etc., all working in our extended school year program with our students. So we are, of course, doing teletherapy, co-treatment, one-to-one sessions, and small group interactions, which have been a lot of fun. And some personal celebrations along the way. I have to tell you that I received an email from one of our summer teachers and special ed about one of our most vulnerable students. And she was so excited and said and shared with the principal and I that the student had reached a milestone of sorts and had been able to engage in some of the more complex lessons. And she was really excited in sharing that. So I just love to be able to hear that and to observe that, even if it's virtual, and to know that students are making good progress. Next slide, please. And so a very successful venture this summer has been our Caring Connections program. And it's really our pilot program in knowing that social emotional learning has been a major focus of conversations with families, data from surveys, again, and just overall, not just in East Greenwich, but in our state, in our country. And thinking about community resources, et cetera, and what can we do to help support our students. So we developed a program that one of our district social workers, Faith Norton, is working on this summer, and she has been doing individualized and group check-ins. She's been doing virtual groups with students and teachers and families. So that's just been a wonderful addition to our services. And the intention there was really to think about, building a bridge from our summer into the reopening of schools and kind of getting a read of our most vulnerable students and families and thinking through what are some of the supports that are going to be needed as we come back into the schoolhouse. So I love hearing again from Faith, who, you know, is talking a lot about, you know, just having conversations with students and working through some big emotions with them in very, I guess you would say, kind of informal ways. And it's just been a very nice addition as well. And so I would also like to, at this time, thank the social emotional learning work group and all of the work that's gone into that. You know how important that is to me personally, but also the students that we serve. So I thank all of you who have put so much work into that. And I'm hopeful that this type of a program like Caring Connections will help us shift into reopening of schools. Next slide, please. And so coming soon from Student Services. So we are planning, we're in the planning stages for a potential transition academy for students who are serviced with IEPs in the week before school starts on August 31st. We again are only in the planning stages. Superintendent Meyer and I have been exchanging ideas, and we're very excited about the potential of that. More to follow. We are in the midst of hiring. I was also on the second round interviews today, and that was exciting as well for principal. At the high school, we're also hiring for several special education and related service providers. Those are in the works, if not already almost through the process. And we are continuing to build a strategic plan for the return to the school building. Family and student social emotional supports, as I've mentioned, IEP planning, and also scheduling. So I had the opportunity this week to, I think it was this week, yesterday morning, to meet with all of the special educators and related service providers in this type of a forum and hear some of the concerns as we start shifting into reopening, and as well as continuing with the parent meetings that we've been having. So next slide, please. So you can join me on any Wednesday. We've been holding meetings with any of our interested parents who would like to discuss any of their concerns this week. Last week, excuse me, we did talk about the reopening plan. We went through that. And then this week with some feedback from SEAC, they suggested that parents submit questions, which we do have a few that will help focus the question and answers and kind of the general focus for Wednesday. But I'm certainly committed to meeting with families during all of these days and times. And we send the link on Monday to our entire listserv so that everyone has the opportunity to join, hopefully at least once. And they will be also, families are also submitting questions, as Superintendent Meyer had indicated, for the district-wide August, I always mix up the dates, August 4th and 18th, I believe. So that's also up and coming. That is all I have for you this evening, but happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Dr. Hughes.
You're
Very,
welcome.
very appreciative of all the work you and your colleagues have been doing. So with that, I'll go ahead and open it up to members of the committee for any comments or questions. Mr. Plain.
Just real quick, first, thank you for all of your hard work on this and for everything. I noted, or I'm sure everybody probably saw, that the commissioner sent correspondence to all the districts in, I think, July 16th, if I'm not mistaken, one day before our plans were due, and indicated that under this phase of reopening the state, that it was permissible to conduct some, or potentially permissible to conduct some services for students served through ESY in person. And that, I'm probably butchering the language, but something to the effect of, parents should be apprised of this. And please respond to me by July 24th. I think that was the date, which again, not an enormous amount of time, but I understand everybody's doing the best they can with your compliance with this. I think she said guidance.
Yes, she did. Yes. So I will just let you know that we through Superintendent Meyer, we did respond to the commissioner, and we are waiting a response back, but that is part of our thinking about August, as I had indicated, potentially the week before, to see if we're ready to roll at that point. And also to think about really thoughtfully about our service provision. We also have students who are within the reevaluation and evaluation process. So given school closure, we had a backlog of students that, of course, you cannot evaluate necessarily over this type of format. So we do have all of that in play. But yes, that is true. And we have responded to the commissioner, awaiting a response back.
Can I add to that? Would it be all right?
Sure.
Please do.
Mr. Blaine, you are correct. The email from the commissioner came out 5 o'clock on the night before the plans were due. And we did craft a response to that with regard to that it was guidance. And then subsequent to that, Dr. Hughes and I talked about trying to work on a transition piece to bring some students in. The things that we have to be mindful of, her guidance spoke about, you know, having the appropriate health and safety measures in place. So we need PPE and we need all of those other required materials to be able to welcome students into the schoolhouse. So that becomes another factor in our decision making.
Thank you for that. I was also going to add to that you know, the other piece unfortunately becomes staffing as well, just to think about something that we need to think through. So that's certainly something that we're doing now and considering what that would look like in terms of any type of transition.
I think I saw Ms. Misella's hand up.
Thank you. And again, to reiterate, the thanks for all of the work, particularly under this very strange, challenging environment. I think I heard you say, it was on the PowerPoint, my dogs are barking, developing a plan to revisit IEPs. Wondering if you can elaborate on that, because I'm wondering, are you planning to revisit IEPs just given the nature, the environment, the COVID environment? And is the plan, would the goal be to have revisited all IEPs before the start of the school year? If you could just elaborate a little bit on scope, rationale, timing, a little bit. Thank you.
Sure. So thank you for that question. We're hoping, first of all, let me just back up and let you know that case lists, case management lists, student lists come out at the beginning of August from my office typically. And then they go to the principals and they assign the case manager or special educator. So that work is coming up this coming week because suddenly it's August and who knew? And so we have that coming up. And what will happen with that is that case managers, once they reengage in the school year and during the first few weeks of the school year, we are going to be having meetings. Virtual meetings are going to continue with our IEP meetings and such to work on the document that's in the reopening plan. So it's the first document that speaks to data collection because we also need another important piece of data, how students return, right? So we need some information regarding that. People, you know, case managers and the IEP team itself, we're going to be able to rapidly move through that document because parents are going to know what happened during distance learning and they're going to have concerns that we're going to be able to capture on that document. The special educator is going to know what the active IEP says and be able to speak to that. We're going to have data from before school closure, and we're going to have some measurements that need to take place. And those will need to take place during the first few weeks of school, as they typically would in progress monitoring. So collecting data to make good informed decisions about the services that students need and additional interventions that may be needed as well. So it is the first document in the reopening plan. And then specifically because we've been told that, we may end up having to pivot back to distance learning, there is a more comprehensive distance learning plan, an individualized one for each student that we will be working through with families. And so unfortunately, we will have had experience in distance learning and have a more informed plan and be able to plan moving forward. So that's our plan.
Thank you for that. I do see that we have a member of the public, actually from our SEAC, Patty Harwood has her hand raised. So I'd like to go ahead and go to Ms. Harwood. Welcome.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me okay. First I wanted to thank Dr. Hughes for the Wednesday evening discussions with families who obviously have had a very challenging 6 months getting through this pandemic with their kids. I did want to get back, and I want to thank Mr. Plain for bringing up the letter that I did hear about from the commissioner to the superintendents about the ESY not being in person this summer, and that the districts, I believe, were supposed to notify families that that they may be entitled to some compensatory services. And I think that the date that families were supposed to be notified about that was coming up, like, I don't know, July 31st or something. So I don't know if that's something, Lisa, you'll be addressing Wednesday, or if that's going to go out from Mrs. Meyer, or when families are going to be notified about the specifics of that letter, what the district is responsible to inform them.
Thank you for that question. Dr. Hughes?
Right. So again, that is guidance from the commissioner. And as I indicated, that there was a response from the district to the commissioner, and we're awaiting her response back regarding that. But in moving forward, we're planning and thinking about particular services and staffing that would be needed to accomplish such a thing. The planning that is needed to go into extended school year, which we are now in week 4 of. We have 4 sessions left, actually, of our extended school year, and that's how it typically goes, in terms of planning. But in terms of transportation and service provision and staffing and all of those things, those are big considerations. Again, to Mrs. Meyer's point, this letter, this guidance document was given to us right before the reopening plan was submitted, and we did respond to it. So when we have further information regarding anything in that guidance document from the commissioner, we would, of course, make sure that families were informed of any changes.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments for Dr. Hughes? Seeing none, thank you again so much for being with us this evening and for the update.
You're welcome.
So that brings us to a bunch of first reads of new policies. And so I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Musella to provide some context for what we're looking at tonight. And just to remind everybody about the process, these are first reads. They will not be acted upon tonight, but they may very well move on to a second read on August 11th, where they could potentially be adopted. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Musella.
Thank you very much. I'll try to go through these quickly. You've seen we sent the school committee the same drafts that the policy committee reviewed only yesterday. So on a couple of these, there will be some variations that I'll point out. The first policy is, I'd actually like to propose changing the number to 2111. It makes more sense in the policy manual, but this policy is intended to do what it says. It's loosely based on, the emergency ordinance that the town has, and it arose out of the situation last year in distance learning when our superintendent and administration essentially sort of revised our grading policy under distance learning to change COLE to pass fail and high school to optional pass fail. So just because there is a grading policy in our policy manual, we just wanted to draft something that gave the superintendent enough, that was narrow enough, but gave the superintendent enough authority or empowered her enough to do whatever needed to be done. And there's an additional wording, there's one extra word, all emergent in the last paragraph, all emergency policies implemented, etc. Second line, which the temporary policies will expire. So that's the intent of this one.
Thank you for this one. And I think it makes a lot of sense. I think that we were in a challenging position as quickly as everything was moving, particularly given that we were also just beginning to figure out what a virtual meeting might look like, let alone actually convening to be able to enact any emergency policies. So I really appreciate the intent of it. I did have one question. It looks like for the most part, the policy is crafted to comport with an official emergency order that is in place in the state and in the municipality. But there is language that says that it may be extended beyond an actual formal state of emergency. And so my only question, and I can understand that there may be circumstances under which that could be warranted, but my question is really who decides? And just, in anticipating a potential future, difference of opinion as to whether or not policies should now pivot back to the school committee or stay within the purview of the superintendent. I just wanted to know what the thought process was by allowing that extension beyond a state of emergency. And given that you might recommend that, who would decide what that decision-making process would look like?
No, it's a really good comment. I think I can elaborate on the intent, and we can even add language, because the intent was just any policies that may have been enacted under an actual state of, like, how do you, for instance, the grading, and let's say the upcoming year, let's say that, Mrs. Meyer needs to put forth different grading options based on, let's say we have to shut down and go 100% distance learning for 4 months out of the school year, but then we can return in the spring. That emergency is passed, but that policy would still be, the temporary policy would still be in effect, although we could certainly ratify that. We can expand some language there so that extend past the expiration of such declaration as long as the policy arose out of the initial emergency, and then also give the school committee express authority to revoke if there's no clear expiration or something like that. I mean, we can narrow that just a little bit, I think.
That was my only question about it.
Yeah.
Other comments or questions? All right, seeing none, go ahead and move on to the next one.
Thank you. All right, the next one is another new policy, distance learning. This policy is intended to, do a few things, but to really set some parameters around, really provide a framework of what distance learning is, particularly since distance learning has the potential to continue post-COVID, right? We're talking about snow days, for instance, and any other circumstances that we might not anticipate. So this policy does not prescribe the very, whatever the specific procedures or criteria or anything around distance learning and what distance learning will look like in a given circumstance, but it's intended to, like I say, provide a framework. So there are certainly some things that need to be ironed out, but what we discussed in policy was There is a difference between a long-term and a short-term distance learning, and in terms of readiness, given the fact that although the district will have one-to-one Chromebooks, K through 5 will not take their Chromebooks home, so there have to be some sort of materials ready, or hotspots or whatever in the event of a short term. There's a couple of other points here. The big picture here is we wanted to distinguish between, distinguish distance learning from homeschooling or something else. The most important mechanism that's outlined in this policy is it's not distance learning unless the superintendent says it's distance learning, right? So we can be in a distance learning environment over a period of time. We can, if Mrs. Meyer declares a snow day, so there's no physical school, or there's a power outage at one of our schools, then the robocall is going to say, this is Mrs. Meyer, today's a distance learning day. It is not intended to cover, let's say I'm going to go on a family vacation with the kids for a week while school is in session. Can I do distance learning can my kids do distance learning during that week? The answer is no, not at this time, unless at some point in time in the future, we open up a distance learning option under those circumstances. But until we do that, the family has to work around the attendance policies and looking at makeup work. And by the same token, distance learning is not homeschooling. Homeschooling has its own process. So that is, and then there's a placeholder for under protocol. In distance learning last school year, there were some very clear protocol that were put forth on the website. That's a placeholder there because we are going to be looking at some tech policies. So really, we still need to, once we have all the pieces, we'll figure out where they all go. But it will probably be a link or a reference to another policy that talks about details like how to behave on camera, the expectation and framework around whether a student must have their camera on, those types of things. So that's the gist of it.
I'll go ahead and open up to members of the committee for any comments or questions you might have at this time. Seeing none, I'll turn to Amara Dodarian, who in our audience, who has a question or a comment.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you. I'd first like to start by just thanking all of you, as many have, for the hard work that you're doing. It seems like an insurmountable task. And I apologize if this question has been asked and answered. I was having technical trouble. I have a few questions. We have 3 children that will be attending Hannaford in the fall. And so I attended or listened in on the last public school committee meeting, where it was reiterated several times that the proposal to RIDE would be that K through 5 would be going 4 or 5 days full. I'm curious what transpired between Tuesday evening and Friday morning that the committee's recommendation went to 50%. I'm not saying I disagree with it, but I'm wondering what transpired in such a short period of time to so drastically change your proposal. That's my one question. I don't know if you want to answer. I can ask the other 2 that I have that are similar in nature. My question is, if it does go to a 50% in person, we're trying to plan for multiple scenarios. Is it safe to assume that the beginning half of the alphabet, I should assume my children would be in school Tuesday, Wednesday, or is it Tuesday, Thursday, or what is the 2 days so that I can plan for the days they're not there?
So I thank you for your questions. From a process standpoint, I need to clarify that that the agenda item that we're on right now is regarding distance learning and not the school reopening plan. So I'm going to ask Mrs. Meyer if she might briefly address your questions, but just would ask in the future that you try to match the questions to the agenda item because it just kind of takes us back to the reopening plan and off of.
I apologize. I was on the school committee link and I didn't realize I couldn't ask a question that way. So if it's something that I should email someone, I'm happy to do that, not to delay the meeting.
No, and I appreciate that, and that's why I would like to allow it. But I just wanted to remind just members of the audience that we try to keep the questions. But I understand that the technological challenges. So perhaps Mrs. Meyer could briefly address it, but then also you can follow up offline a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely, and I'm happy to arrange for a phone call with you and speak personally with you tomorrow, but I'll answer very quickly. We had 3 weeks just to put everything in context to develop these very intricate, complex plans, something that would typically take a year or 2 years to really develop. So we had our reopening steering committee and we had 6 work groups working on this, and our plans were evolving by the minute and by the day. And I often said that what I tell you today could be very completely different from what I tell you tomorrow, because the landscape changes and the feedback changes. In fact, from RIDE, we have gotten 4 iterations of the frequently asked questions, and we are getting feedback on plans that they don't even have answers to. They're providing us, to be determined. So that's sort of the context of our planning, and I appreciate your question. After reviewing everything that we went through, especially with looking at square footage and space that we have, it became clear to us in our last reopening steering committee that it is our recommendation, not that we allowed it. As I said at the beginning, we had all we were charged with was providing a response to 4 plans. But based on what we know and understand with CDC guidance, our square footage and safety in our buildings, it was our recommendation to reduce the amount of students that are in the building to create the safest scenario. So that is, where our thinking went. And I think everybody, just to help you think through this a little bit, it was promoted, I'm not saying by us as a community, but through the state, that plans were needed to be submitted, but they actually weren't plans. They were responses to 4 scenarios. The ultimate determination, as I said, will come from RIDE, or the Rhode Island Department of Health. And then I forget what the second question was.
I'm just, I'm trying to plan if my Hannaford age children are home. My understanding is if it's 50%, it's split by the alphabet, so that, we're the beginning of the alphabet. Are my kids into school 2 days in a row, Tuesday, Wednesday, or would they go Tuesday, Thursday? Or because I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do because of work reasons on the days that they are scheduled to be home.
Yes, and I understand that. They would be going 2 days in a row, and our original intent is to organize them alphabetically. But, again, that comes with how many kids are in the class. And, it's not as simple as as it'll be like that perfect, but that's the intention at this time, to do an
And when do you expect to have that? Because I know RIDE won't give you their decision until the 17th of August, but when will you have a scenario? I mean, personally, I'm a college professor. I have to work Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So I need to know when my children are scheduled under 50%, or when, at the soonest that you can. When do you anticipate that?
I would expect in the short term. I will have to refer to the school principals to get their exact, they're doing class lists right now, figuring out how many kids are in the class and how they can split that, because it's not as easy. Children are not numbers, as so we have other considerations in terms of the makeup of each class. Mm-hmm. and the kind of supports that kids will need.
So I just, again, I want to thank you for the questions, and I appreciate the technological challenges, which is why I wanted to go ahead and entertain them. But I would just invite you to follow up with Mrs. Meyer offline, and to also just to let you know that our next school committee meeting is August 11th, and whatever updates can be made available will be made available that evening. But it is true that we're not going to know until August 17th what our marching orders are. But again, thank you for the question. And so I'll take us now back to the distance learning policy. Did anybody have any other comments or questions on this particular one this evening? So seeing that, I'll invite you to go on to the next one, Ms. Musella.
Thank you. Then we discussed a few policies just because we wanted to take a look and potentially do, just as a matter of housekeeping, any somewhat related policies. The first of which is the homeschooling policy. We had a couple of parents who homeschool their children attend a policy committee meeting, which was very helpful. The intention in reviewing this policy is not to do a major overhaul, because our focus is really on what needs to be in place before the start of the school year. And so I'll get to grading later, but we don't, there's no time or bandwidth to do any major deep dives, that would be required to do a lot of substantive revisions overall for policy. But with respect to homeschooling, there were a couple of items to clean up, and I think that what was sent to the school committee was the unmarked version, the version that's currently in our policy manual. So I will just talk you through the quick changes that we are putting forth. If we look at the first subheading, parent
I'm
response.
sorry to interrupt. I see marks on the one that I got today from.
Oh, that's right. You got it today. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, and it's got red lines through it, so people can see.
That reflects the policy discussion. Thank you.
And I would just say that all of these policies that are being discussed and the most current versions of them are posted in the school committee meeting remote packet on the homepage of the website. So everybody should have the most up-to-date markups.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I'm getting lost with what's going where and when. Thank you. So I would just point out a couple of additional changes. So the deletion of the quarterly progress report, which should be in all subheadings. So there's another one we have to remove under school district responsibility, just to ensure consistency, just as a practical matter. There's some language that was revised in terms of the expectations in the former number 4, just broader language that was more practicable. Updated the verification of topics to conform with current statutory language. We get to school district responsibility. I think the intent was to also remove that first little A, quarterly reports, consistent with the other topics. In addition, we want to, I made the comment, we just want to have our council just review what testing requirements may be in place, so that we're clear on that, and we're clear that the policy adequately reflects whatever our legal requirements are with respect to testing. We get to school committee responsibility. I think actually D and E might be duplicative at this point, so we can remove one of them. And I think that's the gist of it. There are some open issues, but I think that is, for another time. We can certainly look to narrow this more. But the consensus was we just really need to make sure that we're just cleaning up the policy just to be more practicable.
Thank you. Dr. McEwen, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, just to clarify, and first I want to thank Ms. Musella. If she's getting lost, it's because she's doing such a thorough job making sure that our policies are updated. So thanks for that, Anne. The piece about the testing, just as a reminder from the meeting, that is something that we can talk offline and send this to Mr. Oliverio. The 2 parents who joined us are very active in homeschooling associations, and they referenced a case and their interpretation, understanding of that. The decision in that case was that we could not require any testing, and we just want to make sure with our own attorney that that's correct. So that was what that refers to. You see that in 3D under superintendent responsibilities. And then Anne, I think we wanted to remove under school committee responsibility D can be removed and that E would be the replacement, the new E
Thank
with
you.
the red line overview of curriculum instruction and resources to be utilized.
And I see that in there for D, actually. We can
Oh.
talk offline, but I think it's my
Okay.
version, but we'll
Whatever it
clean
is,
up.
that was what we wanted to get.
Yes, it's consistent with it appears elsewhere in the policy too.
Okay.
Keep that. Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Do members of the committee have any other questions or comments? I see a hand raised, Benjamin Curry, regarding the proposed revision to the homeschool policy. Welcome.
That's actually my son, Benjamin. I'm Jen Curry. I was
Hi, Jen. Welcome.
Hi. I was one of the parents at the meeting just last night, and I just wanted to thank you guys again for being so thorough and so cooperative and really on top of your game. It was a pleasure to be able to report to our, I'm the state coordinator for RIGHT, which is Round Guild of Home Teachers, and we have a little over 300 member families, and it was a delight to be able to report to them a fantastic report from East Greenwich. So I just wanted to thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Curry. Appreciate
You're
that.
welcome.
Thank you very much, and thanks to you and Melissa, who I think is also in attendance tonight, who attended yesterday. I just really appreciate the feedback from both of you. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. And the next one?
Okay, the next one, school day. 2150, we looked at that. It's on the agenda with proposed revisions. When we looked at it at policy committee, actually the recommendation is to repeal the policy in its entirety. The policy itself really doesn't do much other than set forth statutory, regulatory, and CBA requirements. So it doesn't do much on its own. And given that we don't know what this year is going to look like, given that we hope there's some potential to revisit the rigidity in the the laws and regs that we're expected to follow in terms of instructional minutes, the recommendation is just to repeal the policy.
Thank you. Dr. McEwen?
Yeah, I wanted to add to that, and I think this is something that I think we have been in public education and progressive public education. We've been tracking towards for some time with personalized learning, and this idea that that seat time does not equate to learning, and obviously people differ and say, well, there's some amount of time that we had to agree on. I think we can eliminate 180 days at some point as well, but we'll get there. Which isn't to say that I want less. It may mean more, but I think the 180 days prescribed is a little silly. In this case in particular, just so the rest of the committee understands, we heard in the forum, and again, with much gratitude to Ms. Powell and Ms. Meyer and Mr. Wilmarth and Dr. Hughes and Mr. Pedraza for the forum, and anyone else I'm missing for that forum that you put on for the public last week, I believe it was. During that forum, people asked about dismissal times. And if we're paying strict adherence to the school day instructional minutes, it meant that we were really going to be entering and exiting all day long. And I don't mean to be facetious about it, but it was really getting in the way of instruction, and I don't think the policy was ever intended to. And so partly because of the pandemic, and also because of new ways of understanding what it means to learn, and that learning is not equated to the minutes that you spend in a day, we think it's worthwhile to ask the rest of our committee to agree to repeal this, and it can certainly be something that we add to future committee work.
And thank you for that. And I just want to get clear on the process, because in the pipeline, near term and then also medium term, we're sort of teeing up a whole bunch of policies to be repealed. I think already you've seen there have been some that I put before you that will, I think that to repeal would also require a second read, if you will. So you've had a first read of certain policy repeals in conjunction with the code of conduct revisions. So I think that's what we have to do. So this would be a first read of the possible repeal of the policy or something, right? Potentially.
I can't say that we've repealed a lot of policies over the years, but certainly I think it's not something we would want to do hastily. So I think
Right.
the first read, second read process makes a lot of sense. And then also, just to be clear, and I think, Ms. Musella, I think you said this is not to say that we are deciding that we're no longer required to abide by state laws. We're simply saying that there are state laws and regulations that that already provide guidance, that they don't necessarily have to be incorporated into local policy in order to be valid and in full force. But it just provides us with some flexibility. And for me, the only reason why to incorporate into local policy something that is required by state law or by regulation is if we are wanting to highlight it or to make it easily accessible and readily understandable to the local community. It just basically brings it to life more locally when you incorporate those kinds of things, but it certainly is not something that's required. And under these circumstances, I can understand why your recommendation is to repeal it.
Exactly right. Thank you.
Does anybody have any other comments or questions on this one? That takes us to the last one that's on the agenda this evening.
Thank you. And I'm going to move to table the discussion of this policy. And then if we end up voting, I can discuss it in this motion, in the context of this motion, or in the policy committee report. There's a few words to say about this.
Thank you. So there's a motion on the table to table the first read of the proposed revisions to the grading policy. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dr. McEwen. Discussion?
Thank you. So this is another policy that I'd highlighted that, was related to distance learning. It's related to all learning. We look at our current policy, which was approved in 2009. It doesn't accurately reflect our current practices across all grades. Most glaringly, it provides a grading scale. It's a 4-point grading scale, letter grades. High school's on a 5-point scale. Middle school does A+. Our primary grades are standards based. So in looking at this policy, I brought it to the policy committee, and the discussion and with discussions with Mrs. Meyer, can we just, knowing that to revise a grading policy, it requires, that's a process. It's a lot of deep thought. It's a lot of, we're looking at moving towards standards-based grading. Dr. McEwen and Mrs. Meyer can talk a lot more about that. So in lieu of doing that work, which we can identify as a priority, was there a way to at least modify the current policy just to conform with our current practice? And the consensus was it's not so easily done, number one, and number two, we can potentially foresee similar alteration in some aspects of grading if we are in distance learning for a long period of time. Potentially, we just don't know what anything is going to look like. So the consensus was to not do anything with that policy, even though, I mean, what troubles me is that our current practice doesn't conform to it. So I would hope that, going forward, if our administrators and the grading policies exist, they're in the program of studies, the high school program of studies. I think the Cole student handbook has it. So the extent that our administrators are putting forth significant changes, I would hope that we're not the bottleneck from a policy standpoint. I think it's important that if we have a policy, it's right and it's consistent with our practice. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing the rationale for tabling it this evening. Is there any other discussion? Dr. McEwen?
Just to add, there's nobody who will be surprised that I'd like to repeal and completely do over our grading policy, and I think it makes sense as we unpack our vision of a graduate. That said, this was something, and Ms. Musella, if you didn't capture this, I just want to make sure that we do, that our new assistant superintendent and our superintendent are committed to, I believe, I don't want to put words in your mouth, creating a committee that will, and a grading committee that will undertake the very hard work of rethinking what this could look like and involving the community so that it has full stakeholder representation and that there's a lot of consensus building and professional and personal learning that goes along with it. And so it's not going off the radar. And we as a committee, I would suggest, need to keep that front and center as it relates to our vision of a graduate and as it relates to what we will undoubtedly learn about grading and any shifts in grading over this next year, where we may see some real positive shifts or different shifts that can be positive for kids around grading. So it's something that we will ask the administration to help us keep an eye on over the year and potentially look at for the next, to create a committee going into the next school year.
Thank you. Any
Thank you.
other comments or questions? So I'll ask for a roll call vote to approve the tabling of this policy.
Allison Powell,
Aye.
Ian Musella,
Aye.
Carolyn Mark,
Aye.
Jean Quinn,
Aye.
Jeff Tronzek,
Aye.
Lori McEwen,
Aye.
Matt Plain.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Thank you very much. And thank you again, Ms. Musella, for all your hard work and to all of the members on the policy subcommittee. So that brings us to our discussion items this evening. Mrs. Meyer and I have added back to our agenda a standing item regarding the FY21 budget. As we all know, there's not a whole lot of new information yet, but because we really don't know when we're going to get it, we just wanted to have this as a placeholder moving forward. So Mrs. Meyer, unless you know something that I don't know, I don't think there's anything to discuss here this evening.
Madam Chair, no, I don't have any new information related to the fiscal year 21 budget.
Well, we certainly hope to have some additional information before the month of August is out. So that brings us to our next discussion item. Members will recall that a few meetings ago, Dr. Quinn, who is a member of our finance subcommittee, started to share with us some of his analysis regarding tax and budget issues locally. And so I wanted to give him an opportunity to complete the sharing of the information and the analyses that he's been looking at as just kind of part of our ongoing education. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Quinn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Arnoff. You're a step ahead of me here. This grew out of an ongoing discussion that I've been having with Town Manager Noda and some of the Town Council members, and with the objective of kind of clarifying historically what's the behavior of tax rates in East Greenwich. And if you look at the document that's displayed, by way of explanation, those vertical bars are revaluation cycles, right? So every 3 years, we're required to reevaluate all the properties in town, and every third cycle, I think it's actually done by an assessor in person, and otherwise it's done using a formula. But you can see that we've got 9 different revaluation cycles there. And the other thing that I did with the data to get this fairly simple pattern that emerged is when the fire department was a separate levy, I combined the town and the fire district tax levy. So the fire district tax rate was typically about between $2 and $3. Right, and when you combine, so today they're combined as of 2014, and in 2013 and prior they were separate, but I added them together. So this represents your total tax levy effect. And what you see is actually a remarkably simple pattern. So within a revaluation cycle, what you see is relatively small incremental changes, and what you see at the boundary of revaluation cycles are some fairly significant jumps, actually some quite significant jumps. So you can see that the largest changes always occur at revaluation boundaries, which is where we'll be next year. There are 8 such boundaries. In 4 cases, the tax rate went up, and the other 4 went down, sometimes substantially, right? We had an $11 drop from 2003 to 2004, and that was followed by a $6 drop from 2006 to 2007. This was entirely driven by housing prices, right? This was the real estate bubble. And then that corrected, right? So housing prices started to come down, and you had some jumps in the tax rate. But again, this was driven by the real estate market, not by unusual expenses or jumps in operating expense. In fact, you don't see any real spikes in operating expenses. What you see is a fairly smooth transition from year to year within a revaluation cycle, right? So there are 19 transitions within revaluation cycles. 18 of the 19 resulted in an increase in the tax rate. The lone exception, you can see it at 2018. That was the year that the schools were level funded and a number of austerity measures were implemented in order to bring the tax rate down. And again, that chart speaks for itself. You can see what the effect of that was on the tax rate, and compare that with 2003 to 2004, an $11 drop, which was entirely due to the real estate market. Okay, so anyway, this is the picture of how tax rates behave, and this model allows an estimate within each revaluation cycle. You can get an idea of what the slope of those three dots is, and if you scroll down a little bit on the document to the second page, you'll see a list of the actual estimated growth rates within each revaluation cycle. So Dr. Arnoff, if you could scroll to the second page, thank you. Okay, so you see that in the 1994 to 96 cycle, the estimated growth rate in there was about 3.37% per year. And this is for the entire tax levy for the town, the fire district, and the schools. And as we go through the cycles, what's interesting is, first of all, we never hit 4%, even when there was no cap. And secondly, in recent years, the rates of growth have been slowing. Right, we're this particular cycle that we're just completing this year, we had a pretty fairly low growth rate of 1.17% annual growth in our. This is in effect our growth in operating expenses and debt service and so forth. Okay, so the takeaways from this, because of the statutory constraints, you won't see a lot of fluctuations within a revaluation cycle, just because we can't decrease the school budget, and the budget can't increase, or the levy can't increase by more than 4%. So they're very tight constraints on it, and you see that in the data. Secondly, the real estate market, there's no such restriction. So we had some pretty wild swings during the period that this data covers, and you can see those. And as I just said, in the most recent cycles, the rate of growth has been, by historical standards anyway, lower than what it's been in the past. Okay, so that's, and the purpose of this is, a student who is entering kindergarten this year is going to be in the system for 13 years. So we have to take the long view in terms of how schools are funded and how we can plan for funding them. And I think it's good to know what's been the behavior of the tax burden to support the schools. Right, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Quinn. Does anybody have any comments or questions? I appreciate you taking the time to share that analysis with us. Okay. Well, with that, we go on to our last discussion item for this evening, and this is a draft SEAC charge. Members of the committee may remember a while ago we did vote to approve a set of bylaws for our Special Education Advisory Committee, but it is a committee within the district that did not specifically have a local charge. I know that Mr. Plain has been working with our local SEAC on the development of a recommended charge. And so I just want to turn it over to Mr. Plain to provide some additional context for it and to kind of walk us through it.
Great, thanks, Madam Chair. And as Carolyn points out, we did adopt bylaws for the SEAC, and we're obligated to do that pursuant to Rhode Island regulations governing the education of children with disabilities. Also, under that same section of the regulations, it indicates that the school committee of each local educational or regional special education program shall appoint an advisory committee on special education. That is the local advisory committee. In the regulations, here we call it the Special Education Advisory Committee. So we're obligated to have one. We do have one, but to my knowledge, we have not, at least in my time, formally charged that committee, notwithstanding our obligation to do the same. So what's before you is largely memorializing for our charge what's already included in the regulations, put into the format of what you typically see in our subcommittee charges with a couple other things. So I'll just go through the 4 or 5, the several paragraphs in it, the enumerated paragraphs. First, on the charge pursuant to the Rhode Island Board of Education's regulations. That language comes directly from the regulations, and the regulations are at 610, 6.10.1, Local Advisory Committee on Special Education. Again, that's the regulations governing the education of children with disabilities. So that's what the Special Education Advisory Committee shall do. So A through E, again, verbatim comes directly from the regulatory obligation. Paragraph 2, same thing. That's the composition of the advisory committee. The A through F, that comes right from the regulations, so that's not discretionary, that's just in there. Paragraph 3, same thing. The composition being at least 50% of parents selected by the advisory committee consistent with its bylaws directly from the regulations. 4, that may have been, I used the format of another committee charge to do this. And paragraph 4, I believe was in another committee charge or subcommittee charge. So I just revised it slightly to be for the Special Education Advisory Committee instead of what other committee I used as a template. That's not necessary. We're not obligated to do that. That's not part of the regulations. Just I kept it in there for discussion purposes. It can easily be stricken, or it can remain with as is or with modifications. Paragraph 5, same thing. The Special Ed Advisory Committee may utilize district personnel to handle the administrative function. That comes from a subcommittee charge as well. It is my understanding that said utilization of district personnel is for things like actually posting the agenda to the Secretary of State's website, or posting the agenda on whatever district channels we post agendas on, and also posting minutes, both with the Secretary of State and on the district's website. That's different than drafting, and drafting agendas or minutes. That's the posting. It's my understanding and it's my experience that when you're on a subcommittee of the school committee, that it's the committee themselves that develop the agendas and the minutes and then provide them to district personnel to ensure that it's posted consistent with our obligation under the Open Meetings Act. So that paragraph was intended to address that as well. I had a conversation with Matt Oliverio about this in advance, because if I were him, I'd probably comment on that part of it just to ensure that that's intended to adhere to not only the district practice, but what's what we can do within the parameters of the law. And so I'm not going to speak for Matt, but after further discussion with him, it seemed like that was not only okay, but appropriate. Matt, jump in if I'm mischaracterizing our conversation.
Nope, let me just jump in real quick. No, we did have a discussion because the language was rather broad, I think, and after we discussed it, I think the understanding is that the use of district personnel is the use consistent with what administrative personnel do with respect to other subcommittees. And it's really ministerial task is what we're talking about, to ensure that agendas are posted, minutes are posted, not to necessarily attend meetings, to take minutes, to do work of the subcommittee. So we may just want to modify that language to say something to the effect of, administrative staff to undertake administrative duties consistent with the work performed for other subcommittees.
So I just have a question about that. And again, I know that the Special Education Advisory Committee is a special kind of a committee that has its own statutory authority. But when I think about subcommittees of the school committee, I've always thought of them as being somewhat different. And so I'm just asking a question because I don't know the answer to it. I mean, are we obligated to treat SEAC like a subcommittee of the school committee in terms of postings to the Secretary of State's website?
Yes. I think so, yes. But do you mind if I get through the rest of it and then we can open it up?
No, I don't mind at all. I just wanted to ask the question when you were talking about it, but we can come back to it.
Sure. Paragraph 6 is the chairperson. That doesn't come to the regulations, but that's consistent with our practice for subcommittees that there is a chairperson. But typically the bylaws of SEAC and typically the bylaws of LACs or local advisory committees address the manner in which a chairperson will be appointed. So I included that. Paragraph 7, the duties and responsibilities of the district, again, coming right from the regulations. Conduct of meetings and parent notification, the last 2 paragraphs, those also come directly from the regulations. That's it. That's everything. That covers the regulations, that puts it in our format, that memorializes, if we pass this, that we've actually done what we're obligated to do under the regulations. It also makes it, I think, more likely that we'll engage the SEAC consistent with the obligations in the regulations, and that its handling of business that it's obligated to undertake pursuant to the regulations will be done in a manner consistent with our other subcommittees. To the chair's question, that is not it is different in that the regulations require us to have this subcommittee. So I would say that it is treated differently in that we're required to do it, whereas many of our subcommittees we're not required to have, we just happen to have. But under the Open Meetings Act, any subcommittee or the Open Meetings Act pertains to any public bodies or any subcommittees thereof, so it would pertain to this as well. A regulatory charge is not uncommon for subcommittees of public bodies. You're probably all familiar to a certain extent because we've engaged with it. The building committee, that's something that we're obligated to have. It has the charge and the composition contained within the school building regulations. Not same type of thing because it's a different type of committee, but required to have by regulation. We have it, we charge it, same type of thing. So it's my strong recommendation that we adopt this charge. We appoint the Special Education Advisory Committee, and then in relative short order, we either reapprove the bylaws or approve a revised set of bylaws.
I have a question, Madam Chair?
Yes, go right ahead.
I don't know, Matt, did you have a copy of the version that I marked up, particularly the conduct of the meetings? I added some language in there about privacy. adherence to the privacy laws. Did you get mine, Mark, up? Because I commented on.
Well, if you'd like, Mr. Oliveri, why don't you go ahead and take us through your comments, because I do think members of the committee received it, but they may not have received it in enough advance notice to have been able to see it all. So
Okay, so I'll go through it very quickly. So, and Matt already answered some of this, where some of the language is direct from the regulation. I think that's fine. So, for instance, paragraph 4. The superintendent shall serve as a non-voting member. My comment was, why non-voting? Shouldn't all members be voting members? The entire committee is advisory. And then we've already discussed the use of district personnel, so that can be clarified. I think there's an understanding on that. I had a comment on paragraph 7A, but again, Matt clarified that. It comes direct, that's language from the regulation, so that's fine. Then my last comment was under paragraph 8, conduct of the meetings. I added this language because it's a public meeting. Mindful of the laws of privacy and confidentiality that govern the discussion, dissemination, or disclosure of individual student records, no public meeting shall be used as a forum to discuss individual students of the district. I think that language to that effect would be appropriate. Do you agree with that, Matt?
To every single committee and subcommittee, yes. I don't know that it necessarily. I understand where you're coming from, and I'm appreciative that you're mindful of privacy and confidentiality. That's the case anyway. So reiterating it is, I don't think, harmful. I just sometimes mindful of the notion that when you declare something somewhere and don't do it in other places, that you were intentional in one place to the exclusion of others. So I just think that applies, but I'm not offended by it. In fact, I'm appreciative of it. But nevertheless, I don't think it should be in there.
Okay. The reason I added it is because I'm not, if this SEAC committee meets, advisory committee meets, I think it's important to reaffirm that it's just not a forum for a discussion of individual students.
Of course.
And that's really why I added it in there.
Yeah.
So that's my only comment.
Well, thank you both. I want to go ahead and open it up to members of the rest of the committee for any comments or questions. Ms. Misella?
Thank you for this. Just a couple of questions. And this is under, also, where do the SEAC bylaws live? Are they on the website? They probably are, aren't they? I'll look them up later. Thank you. Under number 2, the school committee shall appoint, etc. Couple of questions, few questions. One, is there any reason why we would not, and maybe this is regulatory, include a school committee member in this list of membership, or it's optional? I guess this is mandatory. Do we want to make reference to that? Number 1. Number 2, in some of our other subcommittee charges, we include like a term or term limits or both. Wondering if we want to contemplate that in here. That's it.
Yeah,
But
sure.
I do believe in the bylaws.
Yeah.
There are term limits.
Yeah, that's probably.
I think so. Yeah. I think that slightly different with this committee than most of our subcommittees is that we're obligated to have bylaws pursuant to the regulation. So you're right. In the normal course, you would include something like that. And the regulations to this instance provide for a mechanism for doing that. I'm fine. I think it would be great to have a school committee member on the advisory committee as well. I just took the language from the regulation and put it in there. And I don't know if my visual helped to show how I did that, but that's how I did it.
So I'm just suggesting that, for a second read, that maybe that can be put in.
That's fine with me.
Ms. Powell?
And I did have conversations with the CX chair a while ago now, right after I was elected, so a couple years ago in the summer, and we had talked about revising the bylaws because SEAC is different, and it works differently because of the regulatory language. I know a lot of that was in there, but to talk about possibly revising the bylaws to make it more like how we run our other subcommittees, if that was possible, to have sort of a dedicated school committee co-chair and to have a more formal process for SEAC to give advice to the school committee and the school committee to formally respond to that advice because of their sort of interesting and different role. I'm not saying we should do that right now, but I know there was discussion a while back to look at the bylaws again. So if there are questions about some of this language and maybe how we interact with SEAC, it might be a good time to possibly start that conversation back up again.
Thank you. I see that Mrs. Harwood has her hand up. So if it's okay with the committee, I'll go to Patty.
I just wanted to very quickly, of course, thank Mr. Plain for his time and attention to seeing that there is a formalized charge for the SEAC. And also, I did want to comment, Ms. Powell is absolutely correct that a couple of years ago and last year and this year, we've been talking about updating our bylaws. They need to be updated. Again, it'll take a little time. It definitely is something that I would love to have move forward within the next, at least during the start of the school year. So that is definitely a priority for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I had just a couple of questions. One thing that I was going to suggest is that perhaps it's in the bylaws where we make specific provisions that we think work locally for East Greenwich. I appreciate how number 2 really does mirror the precise statutory language, but agree with you that we've started a good practice of designating a school committee member to be a regular attendee. I'm actually not at all sure about the idea of a school committee member being a co-chair given SEAC's independence. But that would be something for SEAC to consider in its proposed revised bylaws. I did have just a couple of quick questions. I'm curious about how under number 2E, it's blank, and is the suggestion that we keep the number of parents or guardians blank? Or are we supposed to fill in that number, or is that something that we should be referring to the bylaws in? It's just odd to see a blank there.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and you'll see in number 3, which is also regulatory language, parents shall compose a majority of the committee membership. And so I left it blank so that depending on what the ultimate full composition is, we could ensure that that number was greater than 50%, or was at least 50%. That's why I kept it open. So if we had, for instance, in F, other members of the community at the discretion, and we had a handful of other people, then X would change, right?
Gotcha. And then I suspect I know where you got the language from for number 4, because in the last sentence, it says the policy committee.
Yeah.
So I would just suggest you put SEAC in there.
Yeah, no,
That's all.
Yep.
That's all.
If we even have that, if folks even want to have that paragraph, I kept it in because it seemed like something people maybe would want, but then we'd have to revise it. So, or we
Right.
probably want to revise it. So more of a look at for that concept, not necessarily the precise language.
Sure, absolutely. And again, I just want to remind everybody, we are looking at this and considering it for the first time. I think that there is some general cleanup that we might want to do that perhaps Mr. Plain, Mr. Oliverio, and maybe Mrs. Meyer and or Dr. Hughes could assist with. I think I'd like to recommend that we move this to kind of a second read on August 11th so that we can come back and review a cleaned up version of this, and also provide some more time and attention to some of the areas where we would need to make a decision about what we really want to include. So I know I would like to have a little bit more time to kind of think about that and contemplate it a little bit. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me.
Mhm.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everybody for your thoughtful feedback and input. Appreciate it. And as soon as we can get this done, hopefully we can move on to support SEAC in the revision of the bylaws. All right, great. Thank you. So that brings us to our subcommittee reports. And so I'll go back to Ms. Musella for most of the rest of the meeting. So transportation and then policy subcommittee updates.
Sure, I won't have much for policy because we did that. So just transportation. We met again last week. We'll meet again this week. Really, we continue to, we're very fortunate to have Ocean State with us at every meeting. So we have been able to run multiple scenarios so that we can, run various scenarios based on whatever our working assumptions are regarding what school will look like. So the transportation language, for instance, in part that we put into the plan was, people are wondering about this, essentially if there will be fewer than 50% of the student population in attendance in physical school at any given time, then we can probably accommodate them without adding another tier. I mean, that's the sort of thing that we're looking at. So when that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is we keep circling around. There's this back and forth. What's learning going to look like? We can't plan busing until we know who's going to be on the bus. We won't know who's going to be on the bus until we know who's going to be in school. We won't know who's in school, and it just becomes circular. But we're still developing scenarios. We try to narrow it so that we've narrowed it down to a couple of potential options based on what we think might happen, which has all been discussed. As Mrs. Meyer mentioned, and in acknowledgement of potential survey fatigue, we discussed at the last meeting, including, the final really an opt-in to transportation, despite the survey on transportation that had already gone out, to which we got a great response. But just to include it in, and we don't want to call it a survey, it would really be an election or something, or an application to include it in a distance learning opt-in election form, or whatever you want to call it, just to make sure that this is really one that families really ought to respond to, and one that we would do a big push on. The other piece is, the timing is tight. If we're looking at August 17th, I mean, we're already looking at the routes themselves won't really change that much, and we can refine those to a certain extent without knowing specifically who's going to be on the bus, because they don't typically change much. But August 17th is really tight. So we are going to have to start talking about what that timing will look like if we don't know who's riding and what bus scenario we're looking at. Until August 17th, how quickly can Ocean State really work? Knowing that we're fairly certain that at least the high school will be on alternate schedule. So you're going to have drivers and monitors who are going to deal with multiple rosters on different days. There's a lot of room for confusion. and we want to minimize that and not have kids trapped on buses because of confusion. We'd like to iron that out. The other piece of this is there's going to be opportunity. I think I've mentioned there is a Ocean State appointed a new general manager at our depot who will oversee the person who has been running our depot. So that person will remain, which is really nice. So we can also work on with our building administrators and the new Ocean State depot manager, improved communication protocol amongst and between depot schools, parents, and work on that. So that's what we're working on, and we meet again on Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments or questions on transportation?
Sorry, I left.
You have a
so sorry,
question for yourself?
Many, but I left out the fact, and because I hesitate to report it as part of the transportation subcommittee, but there's this connected piece, which is the alternate transportation alternatives, because we have a subcommittee member who is looking into that, and because of the, where do the buses go, but where does everybody else go? We're hoping to put out some communications. There've been some communications with PTG groups, building administrators. So we, anticipate that there will be some communications going out, soliciting volunteers for a variety of undertakings, whether it's just to help with the communication piece and disseminating very specific communications, because typically our building administrators do that, but we want to provide as much support as we can with respect to communicating traffic patterns that might include what am I trying to say? If cars are being held and then waiting to pick up, a holding area, if you will, there's a lot involved in the new logistics, particularly if there are going to be increased walkers, bicyclists, car traffic. So we will be soliciting, not we, the subcommittee, but I would just report that there are some efforts that for which the community will need some help. Thanks.
Thank you. Again, any comments or questions from the committee? Mr. Johnzik.
Thanks. I just wanted to add that it's really important to know that we're getting absolutely no feedback from RIDE on this. We're getting no direction, no help. The answers are always to be determined. So the fact that we're not going to know answers as soon as everybody would like is something that is really heavily out of our control. And yet I will say, if it's not obvious, Ms. Musella has made sure that we're meeting and putting everything in place with plans A, B, and C so that we can at least be prepared for everything. But we're not getting any answers, so we can't give anybody in the public any answers as to how many, exactly how the busing is going to work. But wherever there are alternative ideas, we need to explore them.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, we kind of know what the busing might look like, but we can't know what it's going to look like until we know what school's going to look like, right? So it remains circular, and it's true, and it's not for lack of trying, because we have had the opportunity to raise transportation issues on a statewide level in a couple of different forums, and with much gratitude for the time and raising the issues, but with little feedback.
Thank you for that. So I think we can move on to policy then.
I have nothing further to report.
That was music to Dr. McEwen's ears, I can tell. All right, well, with that, I will ask if there are any school committee members who have any suggestions right now for future agenda items. That is our last agenda item of the evening. And seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved by Dr. McEwen. Seconded by Ms. Musella. Roll call vote, please.
Allison Powell,
Aye.
Ann Musella,
Aye.
Carolyn Mark,
Aye.
Jean Quinn,
Aye.
Jeff Tronzek,
Aye.
Lori McEwen,
Aye.
Matt Plain.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Thank you to everybody for joining us this evening. We will see you back here on August 11th. Have a good evening, everyone.
Good night.